Bertha Honoré Palmer's name once carried the same authority in Chicago that Caroline Astor's commanded in New York. Two women, two great cities, and two carefully constructed empires of etiquette and expectation. Most people remember the legend of Mrs. Astor, who ruled New York society with an iron fan. She selected precisely 400 names deemed worthy of admission to her exclusive ballroom. Her 400 became the ultimate symbol of American aristocracy, cold, exclusive, and based on lineage. Yet, fewer people know that Chicago created its own equivalent system, the total creation of a woman who refused to accept Eastern disdain. Bertha Palmer's story begins, fittingly, with a building on fire. It was not a small house or a single shop, but an entire grand hotel, the Palmer House in Chicago, reduced to ash in the Great Fire of 1871. Many remember the Palmer name, if at all, simply as a Grand Hotel brand. Few remember the young woman who walked through that wreckage and treated the disaster as a necessary starting point, not a devastating conclusion. Her name was Bertha Honoré Palmer, and in the late 19th century she earned the title of the Queen of Chicago Society. This title sounds purely decorative, but the surviving record shows something far more complex. Behind the famous balls, the dazzling jewels, and the valuable paintings, Bertha undertook hard work that very few women in America were ever allowed to touch. She actively helped rebuild a burned city. She doubled an enormous $8 million estate. She transformed a hotel into an instrument of power. She leveraged art, architecture, and hospitality as essential tools to place Chicago on the same cultural map as established centres like New York, London, and Paris. The standard narrative typically centres on her husband, Potter Palmer, the dry goods merchant who became a real estate king. However, the material from the period complicates this picture significantly. Contracts, letters, and financial decisions reveal that once the fortune existed, Bertha actively shaped it, grew it, and consistently directed it toward culture. The Queen of Society was, in reality, one of the most effective asset managers of the entire Gilded Age. This is her history, and like most true stories of wealth, it starts long before the famous mansion, with her father, a calculated move, and a set of carefully chosen rooms. Bertha Honoré was born in Louisville, Kentucky in 1849. Her father, Henry Hamilton Honoré, was not yet a titan, but he was ambitious, restless, and always alert to opportunity. When Bertha was only 6, the family relocated to Chicago. At that time, Chicago was not yet the famous city of skyscrapers and vast stockyards. It was a busy, muddy frontier city where massive fortunes were being rapidly invented. Henry chose real estate, buying land strategically as new rail lines expanded and neighborhoods rapidly shifted. He watched streets that were merely fields during her childhood quickly become the center of his daughter's social world. By the time Bertha reached marriageable age, the Honoré family owned prime Chicago property. Their daughters moved seamlessly in circles where money and marriage were always discussed in the same breath. This situation reveals a primary pattern of the era. A daughter's perceived charm is often presented as a personal quality, but beneath this surface lies a robust structure. Henry's real estate investments effectively purchased the drawing rooms where Bertha was consistently seen, evaluated, and discussed by eligible society. Real estate provided more than just income. It guaranteed placement, a seat at a table that carried immense expectations, even if it did not carry a price tag. Among the powerful men circulating in those drawing rooms was a merchant 23 years older than Bertha, Potter Palmer. Bertha married Potter Palmer in 1870 at the age of 21. By then, Potter Palmer was already one of Chicago's wealthiest men. He had built a successful dry goods store that broke away from the older, harsher model of retail. He allowed returns and emphasized visual display, light, and service. That innovative store would eventually evolve into Marshall Field's. Palmer sold his interest, pivoted entirely to real estate, and became Chicago's largest single landowner. He was 44, socially established and financially secure, looking for more than a simply decorative wife. The marriage appeared to be a triumph for Bertha, a young beauty marrying a much older millionaire. The life that immediately followed reveals a more complex alliance. Within a year of their wedding, the Great Fire swept through Chicago. The Palmer House Hotel, which was nearing completion, burned to the ground. Large sections of the Palmer real estate portfolio were also reduced to ash. This is the critical moment when many of the social wives of the period typically disappear from the historical record. The Palmer archives, however, detail a much sharper story. Bertha travelled east with Potter to secure vital financing for the city's massive rebuild. She was young, graceful, and fluent in the necessary social language of drawing rooms. He possessed the collateral, the property, and the immediate plans. Together, they persuaded Eastern bankers and investors that Chicago could and would be rebuilt, and that the Palmers were the safest conduit for their money. The Palmer House rose again, constructed in permanent brick and stone this time. As a wedding present, Potter gave the new, rebuilt hotel to Bertha. In practical terms, it placed a major revenue-producing asset directly in her name and tied her public image to the most modern, fireproof hotel in the entire Midwest. The Queen of Society now commanded a throne that came complete with an attached balance sheet. The rebuilt Palmer House was never simply a hotel, it functioned as an instrument. To understand the full scope of Bertha's power, one must first picture how that instrument operated. Imagine walking into its lobby around 1885. Marble floors gleamed and ornate ceilings soared. The entire experience was meticulously choreographed. Like a precisely designed stage set, every sightline guided the guest's eye upward and outward, consistently directing them toward the powerful idea of Chicago as a legitimate world city. Hidden beneath the splendor was a careful architecture of service corridors, staff entrances, and necessary supply lines. Guests moved as if by magic from the expansive lobby to the grand ballroom and into the dining room. Servants moved invisibly in parallel, working constantly to make that magic function seamlessly. For women like Bertha, who knew every room, every sight line, and every corridor, the hotel functioned as a complex power grid. Banquets held there could instantly honour visiting royalty, presidents, or critical foreign investors. Charity balls could efficiently raise funds while simultaneously raising the profiles of prominent Chicago families. The Palmer House certainly produced revenue, but even more importantly, it produced crucial relationships. The magnificent hotel became Bertha's laboratory for advanced social engineering. At the same time, another critical stage was taking permanent shape, the Palmer Mansion on Chicago's Gold Coast. This was far more than a simple home. It was a physical statement of hierarchy and wealth. It featured 70 rooms, elaborate interiors, and a dining room that could seat dozens of guests. A ballroom of a certain size instantly signals exactly who one is capable of hosting. If one can seat 200, one can actively create one's own hierarchy by deliberately deciding who is left off the invitation list entirely. In Chicago, the Palmers' entertaining quickly set the necessary standard. Presidents stayed with them and European nobles visited them. Young American women with their own ambitions watched Bertha's clothing, her guest lists and her seating charts as closely as they monitored the stock pages in the morning papers. In the Midwest, Bertha performed a very similar function to Caroline Astor. She decided who legitimately counted as sophisticated Chicago. She drew in new money if it supported her larger project, proving that Chicago could equal or even surpass New York in culture. In that powerful role, she was not just protecting her own two sons. She was, indirectly, shaping the marriage prospects of dozens of daughters across the entire city. An unexpected invitation to a Palmer ball could instantly shift a girl's perceived rank. Conversely, absence from that inner circle could severely limit her future. This female gatekeeping was deeply interwoven with the underlying mechanics of banking, real estate, and law that actively supported it. What makes Bertha truly unusual is that she operated with competence in both layers, the visible social and the often hidden financial. Potter died in 1902. His estate, valued at approximately $8 million, was enormous by the standards of the time. Wills from this period frequently placed women in a very narrow box, granting a comfortable income but little or no control. Bertha's situation was markedly different. She inherited substantial control over the Palmer assets. She chose not to simply coast on the inheritance. Over the next 16 years, she deliberately doubled that entire fortune. She achieved this through 3 deliberate and strategic channels. First, she invested heavily in Chicago real estate. She held and actively improved properties rather than selling them off for short-term elegance. Second, she focused on art. Bertha became one of the earliest and most serious American collectors of French Impressionist paintings, acquiring works by Monet, Renoir, and others. Guided partly by conversations with the female painter Mary Cassatt, she acquired the works in depth. They served to decorate her walls, but they also functioned brilliantly as portable capital. Later, she sold part of the collection to fund new ventures, effectively using the art as a temporary and flexible storehouse of immense value. Third, she looked to Florida land. In middle age, Bertha deliberately turned her attention to the Gulf Coast, specifically the Sarasota area. She bought vast tracts of land, including ranches, productive orange groves, and prime waterfront property. She improved them, experimented actively with new cattle breeds, and aggressively promoted the entire region as a winter destination for the northern elite. What appeared outwardly as a peaceful widow's retreat functioned, in fact, as frontier investment on a colossal scale. Decades later, those substantial holdings formed the basis of major Florida developments, leaving a long-term mark on the region's economy and physical landscape. The pattern is compelling. Her husband had built his fortune by catching Chicago's growth wave before others saw it. Bertha repeated that precise pattern in an entirely different geography, adding the sophistication of using art as movable collateral. What makes Bertha compelling for many historians is how she intricately entwined her money, culture, and the collective visibility of women. Nowhere is this more obvious than in her pivotal role at the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. The fair itself represented an enormous national effort at self-presentation. Chicago desperately wanted to prove it belonged on the world stage. Bertha took personal responsibility for something else: women. As the president of the fair's board of lady managers, she oversaw the creation of the Woman's Building. That structure was never a side tent of curiosities. It was a large, purpose-built structure designed by a young female architect named Sophia Hayden. Inside, women's work in art, education, science and reform was prominently exhibited on its own terms. Bertha steered important commissions to female artists, including Mary Cassatt. Cassatt created a massive mural that positioned modern American women as educated, engaged, and central figures in the nation's future. Bertha's public remarks linked the advancement of women directly to the health of the Republic itself. This represents one of the subtle female power mechanisms that matter most. The board of lady managers controlled physical space, financial contracts, and crucial visibility. They held the authority to choose exactly which women were exhibited, which regional efforts were highlighted, and which narratives about modern womanhood would be attached to the fair's official public record. In effect, they curated an entire canon. For the many daughters and young women who walked through the Woman's Building, the message was profound and clear. Women could be patrons, professionals, creators, and institution builders, not simply decorative wives. In Chicago, Bertha operated within a loose sisterhood of prominent matrons, club founders, settlement house supporters, and powerful art patrons. They were not literal sisters, but they functioned as an essential allied group. They shared committees, exchanged essential guest lists, and coordinated their philanthropic campaigns. Within this circle, important hierarchies were always present. Some women brought old family names and modest capital. Others, like Bertha, brought very large fortunes and national political connections. Status was constantly negotiated through crucial hosting duties, significant donations, and, most crucially, through leadership positions in city clubs. Bertha's presidency of the board of lady managers automatically placed her at the top of that informal hierarchy. It also strategically positioned her between two distinct worlds, the elite Chicago wives and the working-class women they funded at places like Hull House. Jane Addams, whose pioneering work focused on immigrants and labourers, understood that women like Bertha were simultaneously distant and absolutely essential. Their money constructed playgrounds, funded necessary classes, and eased various social crises. The letters and press coverage of the time show no simple antagonism. Instead, they reveal a complicated and delicate dance of admiration, necessary criticism, and mutual need. Club women required reformers to grant their philanthropy real meaning. Reformers required club women to pay the rent for their buildings. Bertha moved comfortably in both parlours and slums, though always wearing full jewellery and maintaining the dignified bearing of a powerful hostess. Her presence alone gave certain causes critical legitimacy in the eyes of conservative families. Her money made experimental social projects possible. In this sense, she exemplifies a key pattern of Gilded Age female power, skillfully using the social capital of the drawing room to subtly smuggle progressive reform into respectable spaces. The question of old money surfaces most clearly when comparing Bertha's world to the Eastern establishment. New York's Astors defined who counted socially. From their long-established point of view, Chicago was considered rough, commercial, new, and completely unproven. Bertha understood this judgment but did not accept the ranking. Following the immense success of the World's Fair, she began spending part of each summer strategically in Newport. She arrived not as a supplicant seeking entry, but as a hostess in her own right, armed with fair credentials, powerful White House connections, and numerous European acquaintances. What historians observe is a gradual and quiet shift. Invitations from the East moved from grudging acceptance to eager solicitation. Her art collection, which some New Yorkers still highly suspected, turned into a point of intense fascination. This represents one of the quiet, ironic reversals that reward close attention. By the century's end, a Chicago woman was actively shaping American collectors' attitudes toward Monet and Renoir. The same society that had once deeply doubted Chicago's refinement began acquiring paintings in the exact style Bertha had already embraced. Her consistent work with dealers, especially those in Paris, reveals a sophisticated understanding of how culture and finance seamlessly interact. When she sold part of her collection to the Art Institute of Chicago, she was simultaneously ensuring that her taste became the public canon, while also freeing up critical capital for her ambitious Florida investments. The museum gained masterpieces, Chicago's cultural status rose sharply, and her personal wealth continued to actively work for her. The land records of her later years tell a demanding story of ambition. She acquired tens of thousands of acres in what was then sparsely developed Sarasota and the surrounding region. She meticulously improved pastures, imported purebred cattle, and experimented with new agricultural methods. She invited journalists and investors to witness what a different kind of Southern development could look like, one led by a Northern woman with vast capital and immense patience. What appeared outwardly as a peaceful widow's retreat functioned, in fact, as frontier investment on a colossal scale. The Palmer name remains attached to roads, neighborhoods, and historical markers in Florida. The Chicago Queen of Society became, in a very different register, a founding figure of a new Florida region's identity. Her wealth originated from urban retail and hotel profits built in a hard industrial city. She used that wealth to cultivate landscapes that suggested ease, leisure, and closeness to nature. Beneath the peaceful groves and serene beaches lay meticulous calculations about drainage, vital transport, and future tourism revenue. Bertha Honoré Palmer died in 1918. When she died, she left behind not only a doubled estate, but also a network of crucial institutions and collections that continued to shape taste and opportunity for decades. Her foundational work at the World's Columbian Exposition left a clear template for women's pavilions and women's boards in all subsequent fairs and expositions. She accomplished what many Gilded Age mothers profoundly hoped to do. She secured her sons' futures, sustained her husband's commercial name, and successfully attached the family brand to high culture rather than to commerce alone. For decades, she appeared in many accounts merely as an ornament, a beautiful, perfectly dressed hostess. The numbers, the preserved contracts, and the minutes of meetings confirm that she was also a brilliant strategist. She understood precisely how to use those legal mechanisms from within the limited legal space available to women of her class and time. She accepted certain constraints as given facts, but within those severe constraints, she aggressively expanded the perimeter of her influence. She placed significant assets in her own name. She treated modern paintings not just as decoration, but as flexible financial tools. She used her highly visible role as hostess to shape who met whom, which ideas circulated, and which philanthropic projects received crucial attention. The sheer scale of her achievements and the vast geographic spread from Chicago to Newport to Sarasota give her particular story a special, enduring weight. The standard outline suggests an industrious man built a business, married a young beauty, died rich, and she spent the wealth. The evidence decisively rearranges that simple outline. Bertha Honoré Palmer ensured that the money did not simply dissolve into gowns and ephemeral balls. She successfully turned a burned hotel into a long-term asset. She turned her marriage into a civic and financial partnership. She turned a rough Midwestern city into a serious cultural contender. She turned controversial art into a lasting store of value and a profound public legacy. She turned Florida scrub into a prototype for a wealthy winter haven. Her true occupation was far more ambitious, using the tools allowed to her: a husband's trust, a hotel, a mansion, a fair, a collection, to bend vast wealth toward permanence, visibility, and unassailable cultural standing. The Queen of Chicago society was never simply a figure at the top of a social pyramid. She was, fundamentally, one of its primary architects. Her deliberate choices in brick, paint, and land still shape how strangers move through Chicago streets and Florida coasts today. The Palmer Mansion on Chicago's North Side now stands more as a legend than as a physical building. Newspapers of the time described it as a castle. Yet, in Chicago, admission to the real inner circle ran directly through a woman in a Worth gown with a pen in her hand. Her tool was not a railroad charter or a banknote. Her instrument was a list. Every New Year's Day, that meticulously curated list became public fact. The names admitted to the Palmer Mansion reception were immediately whispered across drawing rooms and club dining rooms. Placement on that list determined whose daughters would dance at the correct balls, whose charities would be successfully funded, and whose invitations would be properly answered. To many in Chicago, it functioned as a local version of Ward McAllister's 400 for Mrs. Astor in New York. But the Midwestern version carried a distinct edge, less pretense of old family blood, and a much stronger emphasis on visible success and perceived civic usefulness. The receptions at the Palmer Castle, the annual charity ball, and her visible leadership in women's organizations together created a quiet, effective governance system. Under that specific system, women with the right names and the right philanthropic causes were allowed to rise. Those who chose to ignore her or who offended her carefully maintained standards, found doors quietly closing in different parts of the city all at once. Her power was explicitly social, not legal, but its effects were measurable on careers, critical marriages, and family fortunes. From the exterior, the Palmer mansion looked like a stage, but inside it functioned as a sorting machine. The couple's home on Lakeshore Drive became much more than a private residence. It was a piece of social architecture specifically designed to make power visible. The interior was meticulously arranged so that guests experienced a specific sequence of rooms, each carrying a distinct purpose. In these highly controlled rooms, Bertha created her own version of a calling card system. Close friends and important allies found themselves quietly steered toward the family sitting rooms and private galleries. Mere aspirants remained in the more public spaces, consistently watched but never fully admitted. The illusion of spontaneous hospitality hid a carefully rehearsed choreography. By the late 1880s, people studied the guest list published in the morning papers the same way others scanned stock quotations. Presence signaled undeniable success, while absence, unless genuinely explained by travel or illness, immediately raised difficult questions. Bertha evaluated how a household behaved publicly, which civic causes it supported, and whether the women contributed substantially to the city's cultural life. She explicitly favoured those who supported her own personal projects, such as the Art Institute, local kindergartens, child welfare reforms, and trade union work for women. A businessman's wife, who visibly funded a settlement house, stood a far better chance of crossing her threshold than one whose only contribution was gossip. Inside the house, female alliances deepened the structural system. Bertha joined and then shaped the Chicago Women's Club, the Fortnightly, and other organizations. These clubs provided neutral ground where wives of old families, new industrial fortunes, female physicians like Sarah Hackett Stevenson, and reformers like Jane Addams could occupy the same room without appearing to chase society for its own sake. Within these powerful circles, Bertha built a tight network of women who mutually reinforced one another's choices. The admission of a new member to a club or an endorsement for a board seat rarely depended on a single opinion. Resistance in one sphere quietly spread to others. The mechanism became especially clear around two specific annual events: the New Year's reception and the charity ball at the Auditorium Theatre. The ball, with Bertha as the reigning visible figure, served as the public season's climax. Those invited to the Palmer Mansion in January frequently found themselves on the charity ball guest roll later in the winter. The system was never officially written down anywhere, yet over the years the correlation became so consistent that people treated it as an unwritten social law. Bertha's refined taste strengthened this entire structure. Her significant purchases of French Impressionist paintings hung not in a museum, but in her dining room, her bedroom, and her stair hall. They instantly turned her private home into a sophisticated private gallery. Guests were not simply admiring valuable art. They were learning that she set the definitive standard for what counted as truly cultured in their world. The clash with Sophia Hayden, the young female architect of the Woman's Building, illustrates the clear limits of this benevolent order. Hayden's design won the initial competition, yet the minutes show how older, socially embedded women, including Bertha, insisted on rigidly guarding the building's public message, sometimes at the direct cost of the young architect's professional autonomy. This specific episode reveals a hard edge within the system. The powerful gatekeepers nurtured some female talent, while constraining others, depending on how well each fit the broader project of respectable leadership. This pattern extended across generations. Daughters of women close to Bertha found themselves much better placed in crucial marriage negotiations. A mother who appeared regularly at the Palmer receptions and served visibly on committees sent an implicit signal. Her daughter would bring not only a dowry, but also vital connections. Informal marriage market mechanics sat beneath the surface of the New Year's hospitality. A strategic seating arrangement in the Palmer dining room could bring the son of a railroad financier into conversation with the niece of a judge. The history of female authority in the Gilded Age was a complex negotiation, a constant performance, and a careful protective craft. It did not always come from confrontation, but often from the masterful manipulation of existing structures, careful negotiation, and a deep understanding of what the world expected. Bertha Palmer's elegant system shows how women controlled access, shaped their cities, influenced generations of marriages, and designed a sophisticated social architecture that ultimately outlived them. The woman in the diamonds who presided over the grand ballroom was not simply enjoying her inherited position. She was, room by room and strategic decision by decision, actively designing the essential world that would ultimately outlast her.